If you enjoy this video, please consider giving a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you have any ideas for future videos, share them in the comments section below. This original bedtime story is made possible thanks to Slumberland patrons. If you would like to support this channel, you can find Patreon details in the description and on my channel homepage. So just take a minute to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to comfortably drift asleep, I'm just going to tell this sleep story in the background. And as I tell this sleep story, I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice, or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And this is a story about a man who is living on a base on Mars. And this base is a large dome structure. And in this dome structure, the man is tending to plants. He's going around those plants, supplying water, feeling the leaves of the plants, noticing the texture of those leaves, testing the strength of the leaves and of the stems, feeling the petals of some of the flowers, judging the health of the plants from the waxiness of those petals. And as this man checks on these plants, so he writes down notes about his observations. And this dome has a slightly humid atmosphere with a gentle mist in the air. The man walks from those plants around to some corn that is growing. He runs his hands gently through that corn, feeling the sensations of the corn against the palm of his hand, checking the quality of that corn before recording his observations. He can hear the almost rattling sound as he brushes his hand through the corn. He notes that the plants and the corn here are growing taller and narrower than they do on Earth. After he's checked all of the plants and corn, he heads through this clear dome over to a door. Through that door, with a sound almost like an airlock opening and then closing behind him as he enters the main living area. And this living area is almost like a large windowless container for the scientists that are living here on Mars. There are only a handful of scientists currently living here, while they test out the viability of these living conditions for future larger and longer manned missions to Mars, to ensure that structures can be created to live in and that plants and crops can be successfully grown and maintained. This man puts away his equipment and makes himself something to eat before heading to his room. In the corner of his room is an exercise area. He changes into his exercise suit, climbs on the exercise machine, and attaches belts to the suit that apply a full body pressure downward through the suit, mimicking higher gravity than there is here on Mars. He starts to jog on the exercise machine, whilst watching a screen which wraps slightly around him with a scene of running through countryside. He has to use this machine regularly to prevent muscle wastage due to the lower gravity here on Mars. While he's jogging and watching that countryside scene, giving him a sense of running through countryside on Earth, he can hear the sounds of that countryside, hearing birds singing so beautifully around him, the sound of the breeze passing through the leaves of the trees, the sound of each footstep that he takes as he continues to jog, and then increases his speed to a run as he continues through this countryside. As he increases his speed, so the video footage increases speed. When he decreases speed, so the video footage decreases speed, with the scene matching to his experience to help increase the absorption of the experience. He continues exercising, gazing into that screen of the countryside as it moves past, hearing the sound of a river increasing, and then seeing that river as he passes alongside it. He continues to run alongside this river before turning and heading over a bridge, the sound of the footsteps changing while going over the bridge, before continuing through the countryside on the other side of the river, heading into some woodland, and then continuing his run through that woodland. And as he continues to run, so he becomes increasingly absorbed in the experience, aware that running while just watching the screen makes it so much easier to keep going and almost forget that you're running while you're absorbed in observing the environment presented before you. After a while, he starts to slow down his run to a jog, and then slows down his jog to a walk, and then cools down before stopping, getting off of the exercise machine, getting changed into different clothes, and heading over to his bed. And sitting on his bed, he reads a novel for a little while. And after reading for a while, so the lights in the room begin to dim, mimicking that it's beginning to get later in the day. So he closes the book, settles down on the bed, gives a voice command for the lights to turn off, and begins to comfortably and relaxed drift asleep. And as he comfortably drifts asleep, so he finds himself sitting in a dark room, watching a moth circling the sole light in this room. He continues to watch that moth, intrigued by the way it occasionally bumps into the light and just circles around that light, before all of a sudden vanishing as the light turns out. And as that light turns out, so the man finds himself in darkness. He stands up and he begins to walk around this dark room. He can hear the way his footsteps echo in the darkness. He can hear the way the sound of each footstep reverberates around this space, reverberating off of solid walls, off of the ceiling and back down to his ears. He finds his way through this room, heading across the room until he encounters a wall, and he can hear the faint sound of a storm outside. And as he encounters the wall, he feels his way along the wall, around the outside of this room, with his hand gently feeling the incredibly smooth, cool wall, which almost feels like polished metal. Yet it has a slightly rubbery texture. Eventually, he discovers a slight imperfection along that wall and realizes that this might be part of a door. He feels along a little bit further and finds another imperfection and assumes that between those 2 points must be the door to this room. So he feels around that door until he finds a handle, and then opens the door with the faintest of creaks. As that door begins to open slowly, so the distant sound of the storm increases slightly. He walks through that door into a dimly lit area, closes the door behind him, and walks down this dimly lit corridor, noticing a wooden door with 4 tiny windows in the top half of it that looks just like any old back door to a house. He heads over to that door and can see the garden illuminated by moonlight. He carefully, gently opens the door and steps out into the garden. As he looks around across the garden and off into the distance, he can see the way the moonlight shines across the tops of the clouds over towards the horizon, and flashes of lightning crackling from the underside of the clouds, with the clouds glowing with each flash. As he looks up, he can see stars and smells the most incredible smells of the plants in this garden. Towards the back of the garden, he can see glittering, glistening, sparkling lights over some of the flowers that almost seem to be twinkling and dancing with sound as they sparkle. He slowly heads over towards those flowers. He can hear that storm gradually creeping its way closer and closer as he gets nearer and nearer to those flowers. He discovers that the sparkling, twinkling lights are actually coming from fairies that seem to be flying around those flowers, but they seem to be almost glowing and twinkling with the gentle sounds of bells. As he stands watching those fairies, so one of them stops and turns in mid-air and begins to hover in front of him. The fairy hovers closer and closer to his face, so close that he can feel the slight breeze from the fast-moving wings of the fairy. The fairy says that they need this man's help, They explain that they have been waiting for the right person to appear here, who'd be able to help them to complete a mission, and that this person is that right person. The man says that he doesn't know how he can be of any help to them or what they would like help with. The fairy gently touches the end of the man's nose, and as she does, so he suddenly feels a strange sensation, notices a flash of light, and as that light clears, he finds himself the same size as the fairy, but standing on the ground, discovering that the blades of grass are now towering high over his head. The fairy tells the man to follow her. He follows the fairy through the tall grass and into the flower bed, where he encounters a large purple mushroom with a small door in its stipe. He opens the door into that purple mushroom, and the two of them walk inside. As they do, so the man notices he can hear the sound of a steam train. He's confused about that sound being inside a mushroom. The fairy opens another door in this mushroom. On the other side of the door, he finds himself on an old railway station platform, just as a steam train pulls in. Passengers disembark. He sees a train conductor dressed in old-fashioned clothes with his whistle, blowing the whistle and saying all aboard. The fairy tells the man to get on the train. The two of them dash to one of the carriages, close the clunk-clunk door behind them, hear doors in other carriages being closed, before hearing the conductor blowing his whistle to let the driver know to pull out of the station. The man and the fairy sit down opposite each other as the steam train begins to chug its way out of the station. Looking out of the window at the passing scenery, the man doesn't recognize anything. It looks like a strange land. The fairy says we're heading to a lost land, a land lost to humans, a land of fairies, elves, and other mystical creatures. Together, they continue this journey on the train. The man gazing out of the window, curious where they're going and why he would be needed. After a while, the train heads through a tunnel. As it exits the tunnel, he notices high mountains on one side and a forest on the other side. The train follows the side of the mountain for a while before turning off and cutting through the forest. As the train travels deeper and deeper into the forest, so less sunlight can penetrate from overhead. The forest continued to get denser and denser, and darker and darker around the train. After what seemed like an incredibly long journey, the train pulled in at a station in this forest. The fairy said that this is our stop. They alighted from the train, walked along the platform, cut through the railway station, and began heading into the forest. The man noticed that there were no footpaths, just forest. He followed the fairy deeper and deeper into the forest. The fairy and the man were about the same size, and the man was confused because everything seemed normal size to him. The forest seemed a normal size. The grass on the ground seemed a normal size. And yet it was as if the fairy had increased in size to his size, rather than him decreasing in size to her size. He followed that fairy deeper and deeper into the forest, until they came to a large wall. This wall seemed almost impenetrable. It towered up as high as the eye could see, and as he looked left and right, it went as far as he could see to the left and to the right. The fairy and the man walked slowly around this wall, searching for an entrance. The fairy said that she may be a fairy, she can fly, but he has skills that she doesn't have. She can't make herself the size of a human, but she can shrink humans to her size and resize them back to their normal height. They followed the wall until they found an entrance. The man asked how they were going to get through the door. He banged on the door, hearing its solidity. The fairy told him that she's going to turn him back to his regular size. She explained that the wall isn't just a high wall. It actually curves at the top to form a dome. So she can't fly up and over the wall, but she can turn him back to his normal size so that he has the size and strength to open this door. She then taps him on the nose, and in a flash of light and sparkling, he feels himself feeling slightly strange. And as that light fades, he realizes that he's much taller than the trees. He pushes on the door, and with ease he manages to push it open. Once the door has opened, and they enter the dome, the fairy flies up in line with his face again, taps him on the nose again, and with another flash of light, he finds himself back down at her size. The inside of the dome seemed strangely empty, with just one tiny structure right in the middle of the dome. It was also incredibly quiet, with no one else around. They walked over to that structure, opened the door to the structure, and discovered that on the other side of the door there was a spiral staircase heading deep down under this structure. The fairy said, "As we descend, I'll count down from 10, and you can walk 1/10 of the way down the stairs with each step, knowing that you'll reach the bottom as I reach the count of 1. And as the man began descending, so the fairy began counting. 10, 9, 8, 7, deeper and deeper, 6, 5, 4, all the way down, deeper, and deeper under the structure. 3, 2, 1. And with the count of 1, they stepped off the bottom of the steps and began to explore. And they were taken aback by how incredibly still and quiet it was down here under the dome. The man asked, "What was it that you needed from me?" And the fairy said that the main thing they needed his help for was to help gain access to this area. They knew that there would be no way that they would be able to open the entrance without him. They explained that they had come here to rescue Cupid. Cupid had become trapped in this place by the use of magic. Cupid had attempted to control the outcome of a situation involving two potential lovers, and that instantly led to Cupid being banished to this location. And this location is a timeless location. The only way to escape here is with the help of a human, because it requires a human and a fairy to work together to access this location. While in this location, Cupid has been expected to learn from their decisions. After just a short walk from the spiral staircase, they find a door. They carefully open that door, and the other side of the door looks like the most beautiful city. But this city is really quiet, just like everywhere else. There seems to be no one around. They explore the city. The man admires the building work, and after a while exploring, the fairy casts a spell on their wand, which activates a tracking beacon. Their wand begins to send out pulses of light, which reveal the location of Cupid. They follow the pulses of light until they find Cupid. And they discover Cupid just sitting in a room, calmly reading. The fairy greets Cupid as if they've known each other for many years. Cupid responds to say that they knew someone would come here and help them out of this situation. And they've learned from their experience. They've learned that they would probably do the same again in the future if a similar situation arose. The man was curious what it was that Cupid actually did. Cupid explained that there were two people who were meant for each other, but they kept on missing each other, never having that moment where their paths crossed to actually begin to fall in love. One of the humans was going to be going away to another planet, and then they would never see each other again. Cupid could see into the future and could see the outcome of this potential future, and so decided to intervene to ensure that these two lovers met. But as soon as they went to do this, there was a bright flash of light, and they found themselves here, so they never managed to intervene. The man, the fairy, and Cupid worked their way out of this location and headed back towards that train station in the forest. The man asked Cupid while they waited for the train, "So what happened with these lovers?" Cupid said that they ended up knowing each other, but not getting to know each other. They never ended up together. The man ended up going to Mars. The woman ended up staying on Earth. Cupid said they both occasionally think of each other, even though they only encountered each other briefly. They almost have this instinctive sense that perhaps there could have been something between them. The train arrived at the station. They boarded the train and travelled back to that mushroom train station. And back at the mushroom train station, they walked through that mushroom and out into the garden. And once out in the garden, the fairy tapped the man on the nose, and in a flash of light, the man became full-sized again. Cupid and the fairy were flying in front of the man. He asked Cupid, "What are you going to do? Is there anything you can do to help those who should be in love to be together?" Cupid responded, "You'll know what to do when you wake up." The man suddenly realized that Cupid was talking about him. He was the man who kept missing the woman he was destined to be with. He remembered about a woman who often tickled his thoughts with her presence. She was a woman named Aurora. He bumped into her once shortly before leaving for Mars. They worked in the same building, but he only remembered encountering her this one time when he bumped into her while getting a drink in the cafe. As he walked through the door, she was walking through the door in the opposite direction. They bumped into each other and apologized to each other. They made eye contact for a powerful and intense moment. And for some reason, after apologizing, she smiled and said, "My name is Aurora," and then carried on walking. He just smiled back before going and getting his drink and sitting down at a table. While he sat at the table, her strange name stuck in his mind, and her smile and her eyes. As he drank his drink, all he could think about was Aurora. He was aware that he had thought about her many times since, but only as that girl he bumped into in a doorway. Cupid and the fairy flew away. The man walked across the garden, back into the building, through the building to that dark room, that storm still hanging in the distance. As he walked through the building to that dark room, so he woke in the morning, having slept well all night, with thoughts of his experience and of Aurora in his mind. He went to his console, turned on audio and video recording, and recorded a message for Aurora. He knew where she worked, so once he'd recorded that message, he sent it to a colleague who still worked in that building on Earth. He was aware that the message would take a while to arrive on Earth, and hoped that the colleague would be able to pass the message on to Aurora, to let her know that he wanted to get to know her and perhaps meet up, if she would like to, once he arrives back on Earth from his Mars mission. He went through this day, carrying out his duties as usual, checking the plants and crops. At the end of the day, he discovered that he had received a message from Aurora saying that she would love to meet with him when he's back on Earth, that ever since they bumped into each other in that doorway, she has had thoughts about him, trying to work out who he was, as he never gave his name. With this thought in his mind and a smile on his face, now looking forward to when his Mars mission came to an end, and he gets to return to Earth. He went to bed, drifting and floating and relaxing so comfortably asleep, with these pleasant thoughts, relaxing so deeply, so comfortably asleep.